Imagine if you could easily find solutions to make your region or city smarter, greener, better connected, more social, and closer to citizens. The Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform can help you access knowledge about the latest policy trends, discover expert-validated good practices from all over Europe, find solutions in our peer review, get tailored support from our expert team. We can connect you with the right people and organizations. Together, we will find ways to solve your region's or city's challenges. Start your policy learning journey today.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on promoting shared mobility through planning, tendering, and parking policies. The webinar is brought to you by the Policy Learning Platform of Interreg Europe, and my name is Katharina Krell. I'm a thematic expert with the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform, and I'm here with my two colleagues, Simon Hunkin and Valentine Dufay, whose pictures you can see on the next slide, and who are going to help support the webinar. So I'm your main moderator. Simon is going to monitor the chat and support our discussion. And Valentine is making sure the technology works as it should. So, as usual, our webinars are being recorded. So you will get the recordings automatically in a link after the webinar. The presentations will be made available. You also get them automatically. And yeah, so we have almost 200 people who have registered, shows a great interest for the topic of shared mobility. And you are welcome to interact with us through the chat. In the chat, you can already tell us where you're coming from. And later on, if you have questions that you want to ask to our speakers or to one of them or to all of them, you can post them there. Simon will monitor them and bring them to the attention of the speakers. All right? Great. So about shared mobility today. Shared mobility, as we know, includes the sharing of assets, vehicles, which are shared amongst users. Of course, we think about car sharing, normal cars, e-cars, bike sharing, normal bikes, e-bikes, scooters, ride-hailing also counts amongst shared mobility. And usually these services are accessed through some kind of digital platform, and we pay as we go. So we pay for the service. The objective of shared mobility is to have more sustainable, affordable, and flexible transport options, making especially the door-to-door travel easier. And we hope that it can reduce the reliance on the individual car ownership. For households, it's also interesting because it's much cheaper to access mobility as a service than to buy a car or an e-bike. At city level, policymakers hope that shared mobility helps the transition towards greener transport systems, that it reduces congestion by having less cars, for instance, on the road, and that it reduces the emissions, especially if it's e-sharing options. And well, the service providers are typically private companies, so this is something we have to deal with as policymakers. Sometimes there are also associations and even public bodies that offer car sharing or bike sharing, but the main feature is commercial companies. So there are many challenges associated to car sharing, as well as many benefits. And challenges that we want to talk about today is planning, how to roll out a strategy and implement it then the city level, tendering security services and to regulate them also in a way, and parking policies. So, to this end, we have invited a number of speakers, and we can see the agenda. We will kick off with a short presentation on the policy learning platform and what we have already done in terms of shared mobility by my colleague Simon Hunkin. And then we will look at 3 case studies, starting with Fabian Kriete from Bremen in northern Germany, presenting a long-standing history of shared mobility bike sharing, car sharing, how they went from strategies to implementation and touching issues such as tendering and also interesting parking policies. Then we're hearing an interesting contribution from Fanny Boccioli from POLIS on what you should watch out if you decide to tender micromobility services, what you should maybe be careful to wish for. And in the end, we're having a contribution from Brindisi, from the Parsmo project, from Gelsomina Macchitella, and from parking policies for shared mobility. This is a brand new project which has only just started, and we're having the entire consortium connected normally in Brindisi. So hello to everybody over there. Then we have a panel discussion, and then we conclude. So without further ado, over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Katharina, and good afternoon to everybody also from my side. This webinar this afternoon is organized by the Policy Learning Platform, which I'm sure most of you by now have heard of before. We're the second activity of the Interreg program alongside the projects, and our aim is to capitalize on the project results and bring the knowledge generated by these projects to a wider audience. So we do this by providing access to policy learning opportunities, providing access to knowledge, people, and expertise. So knowledge is through our Knowledge Hub, which collects good practices from the projects, as well as presenting policy briefs and stories on key themes. People is related to events and networking opportunities, such as workshops and webinars. And expertise is our sort of premium on-demand service, where we provide peer reviews, help desks, matchmakings, where we really try to find solutions from other European regions to help you out with your challenges. So concretely, here are some examples of activities and resources related to shared mobility. For knowledge, you'll see we have a policy brief on demand responsive transport, which touched also upon shared mobility solutions, as well as a story on shared mobility, presenting some very strong good practices. On the people side, we arranged a e-workshop on inclusive mobility, looking in particular at rural areas, in which we also included some aspects of shared mobility. And a few years back, we ran a webinar series on e-mobility, in which we had a dedicated webinar looking at sharing schemes for electric cars. So the recording for that is available. Under expertise, we can also point to a few peer reviews where shared mobility has been discussed, so primarily relating to how we can provide mobility, sustainable mobility solutions for rural and peri-urban areas. So here we have one from central Denmark and one from Leitrim County in Ireland. As I said, our work capitalizes on the outcomes of the various projects. So we try to draw the findings from the various projects. So here I'll just highlight a few that we have on shared mobility. So mainly this is SMAPE and Parsmo, both of which we'll hear from today. So these are looking at shared mobility action plans, but also parking policies for shared mobility, particularly micro-mobility. We also have Mass Solutions, which explores shared mobility as part of a mobility as a service offer. We then have a few other projects, which I'll mention only briefly because they touch upon shared mobility just as part of a broader approach. So first we have In-Mobility, which looks at reducing mobility poverty in urban areas. Then we have Smooty, a new project which will explore shared mobility in the framework of sustainable transport for low density and rural areas. And Embracer, which is looking at intermodal solutions, including integrating vehicle sharing and public transport. So yeah, as I said, we'll hear a bit more today from both SMAPE and from Parsmo, the two leading projects on this. But of course, we'd invite you also to check out the other projects, look at their websites and find out what they're doing. So thank you. That was it for me.
Thank you, Simon. So I see in the participants many known names and many unknown names. Hello, everybody who's joining now. We want to ask you a little bit, a few questions. And for that, we have a little Slido prepared for you. And I believe that the link to the Slido is in the polls, in the chat. You can see in the chat the link to the Slido. Click on it, and then you can take these questions. So we wanted to know from you, do you use mobility shared services, you, yourself? So you can answer, I regularly use them sometimes, or I have never used it so far. And then click on send the answer. Okay. So some people have never yet used mobility services, shared mobility services. 20% use it regularly and 55% sometimes. Okay, I think that's moving a little bit, but it's giving a good overview. Okay, let's move on to the next question. In my city, we have, and you can tick everything that you have. So those who haven't joined for the first poll, click on the link in the chat. It will take you to the second poll. And you can say, in my city, we have shared cars, shared e-cars, shared bikes, shared e-bikes, shared scooters, shared cargo bikes. You can tick all that applies to your city. And then again, click submit. Okay, shared bikes are leading. That is to be expected. I think that was the shared service that has been introduced most widely and earliest. Yeah, it's even higher than shared cars. Shared scooters on second place with 63%. Okay, I don't see any answers moving anymore. So 75% of the cities represented in the webinar have shared bikes, 63 shared scooters, 60 shared cars, 57 shared e-bikes. That's already high. Shared e-cars, 47, and only 13 shared cargo bikes. All right, interesting. Let's move to the last question. So this is a word cloud. You can enter here what you're most interested in following today. What do you expect from our shared mobility webinar? What aspects do you find most interesting? And type something short, not a long sentence, and we will see it appear in form of a word cloud. And you can enter several aspects. Oh, shared mobility in rural areas. That's a big challenge. And we will have in our discussion at the end of the webinar, we have foreseen to touch on the topic of rural areas and shared mobility. Integration with other mobility service, mobility hubs. I think that's going to be addressed in the presentations. New ideas for my city. Parking policies. Mobility poverty. Okay, interesting. Savings. Convincing more people. Convenience. Funds for Moldova. I don't think this will be addressed in this webinar. At least it's not in the program. Tendering, knowledge, regulate. Yeah, we are going to hear about many of the things, not about all of the things. Thank you very much. Okay, that gives a good overview to see your interest background. And you can keep answering, but it is time to move to our first speaker. So I think we need to close this. Yeah, otherwise you cannot see our speaker. So let's close the word cloud. We took a picture And then let's move on to our first speaker.
It's closed.
It's closed. Oh, I have to close it. I'm stupid. Thank you. Good. All right. So it's my pleasure to have with us here Fabian Kriete. He's from the city of Bremen. And Fabian is going to tell us the long journey that Bremen has undertaken and is still undertaking to foster shared mobility. Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Fabian, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. And looking at the chats, I can say, hello, Europe. I'm very glad to be here today. And little spoiler for today, the story of shared mobility in Bremen is older than I am, so older than 31 years. Let me share my screen. And first of all, I'm also going to spoil it. It's a bit of a challenge to tell the whole story in 15 minutes. So don't be sad if I just do a little spoiler on some topics. So first of all, can you see my screen?
Yes, but you should go to full screen mode.
Now it should work. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so for everyone that doesn't know what the free Hanseatic city of Bremen is, Katharina already said it's a city in the north of Germany, almost 600,000 inhabitants, almost 30,000 car sharing users, the city with the first car sharing station in a public realm. We have a very innovative parking bylaw, which explicitly includes shared mobility solutions, and we're also the lead partner of this MADE project. So let me tell you what kind of shared mobility offers we have in Bremen. We have lots of car sharing vehicles, as I just mentioned. We have 3 providers, whereas there's one clear leader in the field, which is Cambio, with almost 650 vehicles. It's a mixed system, so most of them are station-based, but some are free-floating. Since April this year, we have a large bike-sharing system here in Bremen. It's called Brebike. It's partly subsidized by us, by the city of Bremen, with almost 1,500 bikes, not e-bikes, normal bikes. So if you've ever been to the north of Germany, it's very flat here, so you don't need the E in the bike. And moreover, something we're very proud of is that we have 60 cargo bikes that are available for rent. I'm going to talk about this later. And then last but not least, the e-scooters. We have around 2,500 e-scooters by 2 providers on our streets. And this is something where we put a maximum number by the regulation in Germany that we have. It's called special use permits. So all of the shared mobility offers that you see on the streets, they are subject to a special use permit that is also connected to a special use concept that we work on. And it's one of our tools to regulate shared mobility offers in the city of Bremen. So first of all, I'm going to jump to way back in 2009. My former colleague, Michael, thought it's a good idea to have a very ambitious strategic plan. Strategic plan, not in terms of planning and the strategic papers that you might know, but a very bold plan. So back then in 2009, he went to the political leaderships and said, we want to have 20,000 car sharing users in Bremen in 15 years. And everybody looked at him and just started laughing. Why? Because yes, it was 2009 and car sharing was still a niche product. But it was a very bold plan and a very smart plan. So I'm going to talk about the various blocks that are in the plan. So first is the integration in public transport is very vital to make car sharing successful, but also bike sharing, shared mobility in general. Then, of course, if we as a city preach about using shared cars, you have to do it yourself. So we as a city, we integrate car sharing offers within our own mobility management. So for example, if I ever need a car, the only option I have as a worker for the city is that I use a shared car. Thirdly, is car sharing stations in the public realm. I'm going to talk about this later. It's called the Mobilpunkte in Bremen. The fourth point is integration and new real estate developments. For a couple of years now, we have a new law called Mobilitätsbauortsgesetz and it shifts away from, if you have a new real estate development, that instead of just looking at parking spaces that you need for this property development, we shifted towards mobility management. So you can have shared mobility offers on this new real estate development instead of just parking spots for private cars. And last but not least is public awareness. It's something that we see also in this May project. Some partners are overlooking this aspect, but we as the city of Bremen think is very important. That's why we regularly do initiatives. For example, we show some short spots in art cinemas. For our bike sharing scheme, we did a communication campaign in all of our buses and trams. If we have the time, I'll show you a little clip at the end of my presentation. And last but not least, that's something we are checking right now, if it's legally possible to subsidize some car sharing station in economically challenging areas. So where do we want to take this? And this is where SMAPE comes into place, is we don't want to have a car sharing action plan now. We want to have a shared mobility action plan that's multimodal, that's also looking more into the future, that's catering new trends and developments in our city. And that's why we decided to join and lead the Shared Mobility Action Programs Exchange project. Here on the map, you can see the consortium. It's a very big mix, and the topic of shared mobility in rural areas always pops up as well. But some motivating words is it is indeed possible. We just traveled to Lesbos, an island in the North Aegean Islands, and they are just starting their new e-bike sharing scheme. And here you can see the consortium in action back in Norway, looking at the bike sharing system, where I personally got a lot of inspiration from as well. So that is the idea with the overarching plan, that we want to develop from a car sharing action plan now to a shared mobility action plan. And as I said, coming soon, hopefully by the end of this year, but of course there's some externalities that are sometimes hard to calculate. So let's talk about the car sharing stations. We have around 51 stations that are in the public realm and around 100 stations that are on private ground. So these 50 plus stations, they are planned by the city, constructed by the city. And our overarching plan is that we want to have a car sharing station within a radius of 300 meters everywhere in the city. And of course, you can see they're very concentrated in the city center. That's something we want to cater with maybe subsidizing stations in outer districts as well. And this is a time frame of how long it takes to get a mobility station on the street. It's a time span of 1 to 2 years. So we start with the preliminary stakeholder engagement. We talk to our car sharing providers, say, for example, hey, we have location A and B in mind. What do you think? Is it feasible? Would it make sense? Then we have a drafting of technical designs. We engage our road authority. And then we have a more formal stakeholder engagement, and then we start the expression of interest procedure. Following this, there's an implementation and construction phase, and there it's also, again, public awareness. We talk to our citizens. So within a radius of, I think, around 200 meters, we send out leaflets to the entire neighborhood, making them aware, hey, there's a mobility hub coming in your neighborhood. This is what happens there. It's a very great option. Feel free to use it to make them aware that there's something coming. And then, of course, at the end of the day, that's what I already mentioned, the provider has to apply for a special use permit. And then finally, the station goes into operation. Here you can see one of our classical Mobilpunkt. It's the largest stations. They're established since 2003. Back then, we just called them car sharing station. Now we call them mobility hubs. So you can see that the world has evolved in 20 years plus. Most of them, they're focused around public transportation hubs. You can see that all of our mobility punkte, they have bike parking, because we see that most car sharing users, they use their bike to get a car and they don't use their private car to get a shared car, which makes sense. And then secondly, you can see the Mobilpünktchen. It's our smaller ones, 1 to 2 cars, sometimes 3 cars, and they are focused to be where people live, so where they start the trips. So you don't see them at big intersections, but rather within neighborhoods. Here you can see a typical residential area, and then at the end of the street you have 2 parking spots for shared cars. And then again, very clear visibility, accessibility, a branding and a branded identity that's been around for 20 plus years that we also get with our bike sharing system, now have for our e-scooter parking, so the citizens know this dark blue and green is connected to shared mobility when they see it in the street. I'm going to skip through this a little bit, but you can see there's also clear infrastructure improvements wherever we build our car sharing stations. One of our focus for the smaller, the Mobilpünktchen, is that we saw the problem that larger vehicles, also emergency vehicles, they had problems to access all of our streets in the inner districts. So our planning department decided to do this at road intersections so that larger vehicles like this, they are not blocked by illegal parkers and that they can easily access streets. And here you can also see that we're also aiming to improve, in general, the neighborhood, but also walkability to make it more barrier-free. And here, that's something I'd like to stress to everyone thinking about implementing car sharing in their cities. Implementing car sharing offers in your city, it's not a sprint. It's also not a 500-meter run. It's a marathon. And you can see that lots of hard work, public awareness campaign, sometimes it takes some time to get pace, but if it takes pace, then you can see there's an explosion in users. And that's something we're very proud of, and we can already tell for 2025, the curve is also going up still. And then there's the impact of car sharing, which is especially important for inner districts where there's a lot of conflict on the limited space that is available. So in our study in 2017, we found out that one shared car replaces up to 17 private cars. As I said, it's from 2017. We have a new study that's coming out soon, hopefully this year. And then ideally, we're going to have some new figures to support our idea of promoting car sharing as a city. And of course, other positive effects as well. And as I said, clear brand identity, that's something where we as a department talked about in 2024 for our e-scooter parking spaces, for our cargo bike parking spaces, for our bike sharing parking spaces. We want to have the same brand identity that everyone walking through the streets sees dark blue and green. Hey, this is a shared mobility offer that I can use. I'll show you some pictures from street spaces later on. And then I'm going to briefly talk about our bike sharing concession. I have 3 more minutes I see on my clock, so I'm speeding a little bit. We had this EU-wide tender in 2024, and we started the bike sharing scheme already in April this year. So it's a record time. So my colleagues Rebecca and Wiebke really did a great job there. And I'm going to show you some defining system parameters that we talked about before. So of course, the number and the type of vehicles. But for us as a city, we wanted to make sure that we have a mixed system. So we do have some free floating, but also some stations in the public realm. The idea was that we want to have, so in order to have it in your routine travel patterns, you need some sort of reliability of a bike being there. So for example, if I take the train to Bremen and I want to get to work on time, it must be 100% reliable that I get out of the train station and there's a shared bike that I can use. So idea is there, have a station there, and the provider needs to service the station. And of course, I already talked about the conflict of space, especially in inner districts. And I think you all know the debates about the e-scooters. That's something we want to prevent with stations in very dense neighborhoods. So we look at our dashboard, for example, see, oh, there's some hotspots there. It might make sense to have a station there. Of course, quality criteria for the vehicles, quality criteria for customer service, the app itself, some tariff requirements, and incentives to cooperate with our local stakeholders. So as I mentioned, we launched in April. Nextbike won our tender. They now have 1,450 bikes, 60 cargo bikes at our Mobilpunkte. So now we have not only a car sharing station, but a multimodal mobility hub. We have stations all over the city. We had a promotional month, again, public awareness campaign that was a free trial month. We have a separate communication campaign that we as a city did. The provider also did one. And here you can see some pictures of the bikes. Here you can see some bikes at our Mobilpunkt. You can see the clear design. And so far, we're doing very well. We have some great cooperations going. So with our local university, the use of shared bikes is integrated in the semester ticket. So every student that's enrolled can use them for free. Everyone that has a subscription with a public transport operator can use them for free for 15 minutes. If none of this applies to you, it's still only 99 cents per half an hour. It's only 99 cents per half an hour for a cargo bike. So it's very, the entry and the threshold to use them is very low. And we have them, which I think is the best part, not only in the city center, but also in the outer districts that are often overlooked. But we politically decided to include them. And now only 5.5 months in, we have over 250,000 rentals already. So I jumped through this all to give you some lessons to take away. First of all, early strategic planning is key for sustainable growth. Don't shy away to have bold numbers, just put them out there, make shared mobility visible with a very clear ambition. Integrate them with public transport, especially for bike sharing and e-scooters. Think of them as part of public transport, not only as complementary to public transport, but part of the public transport ecosystem. Have very visible, clearly marked infrastructure with a clear brand identity. Don't rebrand every 2 or 3 years. Give it some time. Have tenders with very clear quality criteria, but Fanny, I think, is going to tell you more about this. Combine different shared mobility offers. Please do communication campaigns, very important. And then a little advertisement block for the Interreg Europe. Do some international cooperation. The SMAPE project really gave us some inspiration. And sometimes it's also a very good feeling to give others some inspiration as well. So it's not a one-way street there as well. And then again, continuous adaptation. Think of new ways to forward your offers in your city. And I think if I have another minute, Katharina, I can show you one of our...
No.
Okay, no more video, but feel free to ask some questions.
But you can paste the link of the video in the chat, and we can look at it independently. There are indeed quite a few questions in the chat, Fabian. So thank you very much for your very, very nice overview. It's great to kick off with such a nice and tangible case study that covers such a long time frame where we can see the evolution, and that is really, really important. I really like your slide where you can see the evolution. But I would like to give priority to the questions coming from the floor. Simon is going to read them to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot, Fabian, for the presentation. So I'll start with a nice, simple question, first of all, coming from David. He's asking simply if it's possible to download the initial car sharing action plan from 2009. Is this available online?
Yeah. I can post the link. We have a Mobilpunkt website, and I think it's also translated into English and into Norwegian, I think. So yes, you can download it, no problem.
Perfect. Perhaps you can share with us the link, and we'll include it in the follow-up.
I'll share it in the chat.
Perfect. Then we have 2 questions coming from Karen, which I'll put together. So the first is, do you have any concessions for car sharing?
Okay, so that's something... the public stations, they're part of a tendering process. So if we have a new public station. That's what I meant with the expression of interest procedure. That's the formal tender procedure. So car sharing operators, they can decide to apply to use this station.
Okay, thank you. The second question, I think you answered. You said the question is, are the bikes and cargo bikes electric? But I believe you said North Germany is very flat, so they were not electric bikes.
Yes, no electric bike.
Yes. Okay, great. The last question came from Jan. He's asking, is it obligatory for the developers of new estates in Bremen to build mobility sharing facilities in these estates?
No. It's an option, and they can opt for this option, but they can also opt out of this option.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for one more, Katharina? A question just popped up. Yes, okay. So another question from Daria here, who says, are there car sharing options for people with disabilities?
I'm not sure. I don't think Cambio has an offer. However, there's shared bikes for people with disabilities, and this system is run by the ADFC in Bremen. I think there's around 6 special use bikes. But it's definitely something that we as a city, but I also personally find very interesting. So, for example, after work, I often go to my sports club, and there we have a big section where people do sporting activities with people with disabilities, and there's one definitely big need that's not catered at the moment. So, especially for clubs, for sports associations, it's a very big threshold to buy a car, but unfortunately, that there's no offer for shared cars. Yeah.
Okay, so there are more questions popping up, but I still have a pressing one, and we need to move on. So, Fabian, how did you get your first car sharing provider attracted in 2009?
So it started in 1990. That's why I said the story is older than I am. It started in 1990 with a citizen initiative called Stadtauto. So a very grassroots initiative. I think back then you had to call somewhere to open the car. And then from this initiative, there arose a car sharing company around the year 2000. And then we as the city started erupting mobility hubs in 2003. So way before there was legal certainty in Germany. And then in 2017, the national car sharing law in Germany came into action. One of the driving forces was my colleague that is now retired that I've just mentioned. And from this legal certainty, it was also easier for us to make tendering processes. So way before then, and that's a message I can give to everyone here, is if you're a city, make sure you have grassroots initiatives, innovative neighborhood activities on your radar, because this is, at the end of the day, the soil where innovation grows.
Thank you very much. I don't want to cut the questions that are still coming, so I invite you, Fabian, to look a little bit at the chat while I introduce our next speaker. So thank you, Fabian. And Fanny, over to you. So Fanny is from POLIS and is going to tell us a little bit if a city decides to tender, but there are also cities that don't decide to tender, because tendering is not the only way to get to a shared mobility scheme, right, Fanny?
Exactly. Thank you very much for this introduction. And also thank you very much to Fabian. Just very quickly, you are seeing my screen? Everything is working on that regard, or?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So also thank you very much to Fabian, which provided a great introduction to the overall topic. But now, as Katharina said, we're going to look a bit more into tenders. But I have to say I'm very impressed by how quickly the tender of Bremen for the bike sharing came along. But usually, before you start tendering, and you usually start by like creating the terms of reference and also discussing a wider set of criteria. And there are some things that usually always pop up. And what we tried at POLIS is to really close at some of these recurring themes that usually come always at some point, and something that is always mentioned in tenders. So these are speed limits, parking, helmets, also user education, local employment, and also life cycle assessment. And we wanted to explore also their operational implications. Because if there's really one thing we have learned from like 7 years of like shared mobility in Europe, and also especially shared micromobility, it is that it's easier to say in the end what should be regulated than to actually and effectively regulate it. So since the actually quite sudden arrival of e-scooters and also e-bikes in public space, local authorities have been under actually a great deal of pressure to respond to this. So what followed was kind of a rapid and actually often also reactive cycle of regulations, mostly through tendering, but also through legislation and both. So this report that I'm going to present is not about judging individual practices or policies, but actually it documents what happens when rules are applied in practice. So when they meet the daily routines of the operators, but also the realities of enforcement and the expectations of the public. So the way we approach this is that we had a series of focus group meetings, and next to that, we had some interviews with experts. So the experts we're talking of, and also the members of the focus group meetings, were either professionals working for a shared mobility operator, but also, of course, the local authority that has to deal with shared micromobility. So it is important, as I said, we're not actually trying to make detailed recommendations. The purpose was to collect and reflect the practical implications as they're experienced in the field. And the hope is with that to help the stakeholders, but also the people that are attending this webinar today to learn from like real world practice. So the way I will proceed now is I will introduce each of these topics. So for each of this topic, you will first see like a representative quote from one of our focus groups. I'll give you a couple of seconds each time to read it, and then we can explore the issue a bit further. So first of all, speed. So speed limitation is something that comes up quite often because, to be fair, it seems very intuitive when you're regulating or when you're tendering. But on the other hand, limiting the speed of e-scooters and e-bikes without having similar restrictions also on cars, on vans, but also like buses, only widens the gap of the speed between like the users of the same road. So this is an issue. Then also we have geofencing that is often used as a tool to implement speed limits, but GPS accuracy is still a limitation, especially in dense environments and in cities. So this can lead vehicles to slowing down abruptly in the middle, or on the contrary, failing to slow down when it is required. So this is actually taking something that was supposed to be a safety measure and turning it into a source of confusion, sometimes also like user frustration. And in the worst case, this could increase also danger. And while field testing and fine-tuning are always necessary, the processes are always quite resource intensive. So overly complex or very frequently changing low-speed zones further complicate compliance and might actually, again, reduce the overall service quality and the safety. So the next point is parking. So improperly parked shared vehicles, has sparked huge public backlash. I think you are all aware or you have read some of the headlines. But addressing this issue is more complicated than like simply enforcing fines or creating new regulations, because we don't have yet a really definition of what properly parked shared micromobility means. And public expectations here often clash with operational realities. So dedicated parking zones, for example, like hotspots or like hubs or docking stations are really a way forward. But then the question remains is like, who's paying for that? And can parking also be reallocated without like a political fallout when we're taking space from cars? How will the compliance be monitored when GPS accuracy in the end is limited? And should shared micromobilities vehicles like be excluded, for example, from public bike racks, even if there are no other options? So in many places, the parking debate has moved actually faster than the infrastructure needed to support it. The next point we discussed, and is often discussed in general, is helmets. And this continues to pose questions because most European cities at some point decided that at least for adults, there is no use to wear helmets for cyclists or scooters, e-scooters. But some cities have actually tried to make it compulsory to provide them. Seems pretty sensible. I mean, we all think, of course, that it's safer, but it's very impractical when we're talking about shared vehicles. So storing vehicles, storing helmets on a vehicle is technically, like poses technically, but also hygienic challenges. Not sure you want to wear a helmet that has been worn by someone before. Also, you have to make sure the size works and is correct. And also there's the question of maintenance, theft prevention, and all of this needs actually a lot of operational oversights that a lot of services like are not equipped to provide or cannot provide. And also there's this idea that making helmets available will lead to their use, which is not always the case. And there is no conclusive evidence that helmet distribution schemes really improve the safety outcomes, especially, and here we come to something we mentioned again, if the wider traffic conditions are not met. Then we have another point, which is user education. I think the quote already gives you a good idea what we're going to say, but user education is practically this idea that users should behave orderly, and it's a really recurring theme in micromobility. So what cities now like to do is to require operators to invest in education, be it through like app onboarding, for example, awareness campaigns, but sometimes also face-to-face meetings. But these initiatives seem to have a very limited impact. So for example, like users that skip the messages or the tutorial to actually get to the service, people not showing up to these events. And operators also mentioned that the behavioral impact of these programs is quite small. So this also raised in general in this focus group, like the wider question of like, who is responsible for that? Is it the operator, or is this something we should look at, for example, already on a school level? And then we get to the last point we discussed. Actually not yet. We still have another one, second to last, which is local employment. I'll give you again a couple of seconds to read it. So a growing number of cities like include employment conditions in their tendering criteria. So the intention is quite positive, I would say, because it's the idea to encourage like a more stable and so more fair and local employment practices. But the reality also here again for the operators is a bit complicated as demand for micromobility fluctuates. So staffing levels in like the summer are not the same in the winter. I don't know how you feel about taking an e-scooter when it's snowing. So short-term contracts with cities create some kind of instability. So the question is, should the operators invest in like in-house teams that are more expensive, or should they rely on like third-party providers? Something that has been done on a city level, for example, is to provide longer licenses in the hope to create more stability, to support also better jobs. However, this also requires a certain level of performance monitoring and enforcement. And finally, now I said it, we're getting to the last point that we're discussing, which is the life cycle assessment or like broader sustainability. I mean, as you are aware, sustainability is also a central aspect of like micromobility policy, and cities are asking operators to provide a life cycle assessment. I actually didn't leave you the time to read, so perhaps if you want to read it first, I'll give you a couple of seconds and then I continue. So I hope it's fine now. So the idea of this life cycle assessment is that it should cover like everything from like the raw materials at the beginning to the manufacturing process, then to the use, the maintenance, and then the end of life recycling. But the issue is that many assessments in the end focus only on like headline figures. So there are a lot of things that are not accounted for example, like spare parts or like the power sources, or also the emissions when you are collecting and having rebalancing operations. And also a very important point, and perhaps some of the cities can relate to that, is that only few city staff are trained to actually properly read an LCA documentation. So as a consequence, it's very difficult to check the claims that are made in these LCAs. So now we are coming to the conclusions. So I think the conclusions might be especially interesting for those that are currently also working on a tender. So first things first is, I mean, it seems quite obvious, but rules do have a practical implication. So for a rule to be effective, it must be complied with and enforced. So this requires action from the operators on the one side that needs to comply, but also from the local authorities that has to verify if this is being complied with, and if necessary, also impose corrections or penalties. So these activities like generate a series of practical demands, and they're not all easy to address. And this is something we're also reflecting in the second point, which is that obvious doesn't mean right. So there is really rarely a simple match between a problem and a rule that it's designed to solve it. So on the one hand, we shouldn't overcomplicate something that is simple, but we shouldn't oversimplify something that is quite complex. So what matters is not just the principle behind the rule, but also the conditions behind it. These might be social or technical, institutional, that make actually compliance and enforcement possible. And these conditions are not as obvious as they may seem. Then we have the third point, which is beware of rules by public request. So regulations have often been introduced reactively, so driven more by complaints, often from non-users more than users, than by the actual need of the user. So for example, now we see this trend also shifting. So as regulation of parking has advanced, we hear now the increasive complaints of users themselves who then said there's not enough place actually to park. Then something that I think a lot of people here might relate with is that regulation is not easy. So I think, and this is something we really noticed within these interviews, is that cities very often understand the needs and concerns of the micromobility operators, and often they share similar concerns. But they have to work within a regulatory framework. And this involves also multiple levels of authority with different interests. So for example, something we saw, I think, quite nicely in the quote on parking is that some municipalities really depends on the on-street parking revenue. So this can slow down or even block the creation of parking for shared micromobility. Then we have rules need enforcement, and enforcement is not easy, or is not easy, but it also needs capacity. So some cities lack the capacity actually to monitor and ensure that rules are respected. And this is also not particularly positive for the operator, because on the contrary, if there's not sufficient enforcement, there's also a lack of trust. And a lack of trust can then also bring more rules than actually fewer rules. So then it might have, again, a negative impact on the operator. And then the last one was actually more a questions we have been asking ourselves, is that most rules designed for shared micromobility services do not apply to private vehicles. So there are more and more private vehicles. I think this is something we're seeing, for example, in cities like Paris, where there are no e-scooters anymore or shared e-scooters. And this brings a new challenges in integrating and regulating them. So perhaps the idea could be that shared services can play a role by reshaping the behavior of the user and setting norms that may influence the private use in the end of micromobility. So just in general, I think what we really want to get across, and here you can have the link again to the report, is that good regulation takes time, and also a good tender takes time. It requires being grounded in clear priorities and having realistic expectations. And above all, it really requires also the humility to test assumptions and to learn from those who may have to make these rules work on a day-to-day basis. So I hope I was in time.
Yes.
And that was it from my side. Thank you.
Right on time. Thank you, Fanny. It's actually very valuable to sit down and gather all these insights on tendering and what probably some cities have done wrong and later regret it. It takes time to write a good tender, but there are also other means to get shared mobility into the city. A tender is not necessarily a requirement, right?
Exactly. I mean, we talked with a lot of cities, and this is a follow-up report. So we are trying, since shared micromobility is something that is evolving quite quickly, we talked with cities that are already at the third tender. We're talking with cities that had a tender, weren't too happy with the outcome, and then changed their memorandums of understanding, open door policies. So there's a lot of diverse options. I think the most important is when you choose something is also to give yourself the capacities and the means to make it work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is about micromobility, and we have seen, especially in the very big and very touristy, crowded capitals or large cities in Europe, like Paris, Barcelona, and Madrid, they have altogether banned the rental scooters already 2 years ago, and mainly over concerns of safety, collisions with the pedestrians, and I mean, littering on the sidewalk. I don't know. So for them, the disturbances were higher than the anticipated benefits. Do you see this is different for smaller cities? Is it a problem typical for the extremely crowded capitals? Could it be less of an issue for the mid-sized cities?
That's a very good question. So in general, I think that for the medium and smaller size cities, a lot of them tender, but the process is different. And in the end, it's more challenges for them to also attract operators. So perhaps there's also, in this regard, it might work better. Also, I mean, it's also legitimate, I think, to say to these big cities that it's legitimate or a fair answer to say that saying they don't want a certain mode. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it takes time to also look back at what didn't work to perhaps make it work in the future. Exactly. And I think, and this is something we pointed out in the report, and what we are currently seeing in some of these cities is that the scooters are still there. So now from private, so those are privately owned and not shared, but the question is, doesn't it bring like the same question? So this is something they also need in the end to work on.
Yeah, probably minus the parking problem, because people take them more with them. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks for pointing that out. Let's ask a little bit our audience if you have used tenders in your cities. And again, take a look at the chat. Click at the link on the chat so that you can see the question on Slido popping up. And then let us know. In my city, a tender was used for car sharing, bike sharing, scooters. We haven't used tenders, but we do have shared mobility services. Or we haven't used tenders and we also do not have shared mobility services, or I don't know, which is fair enough. For instance, I must admit that I don't know what has been done in terms of tendering out the mobility services in Brussels. I don't know. I know we have a lot, but I don't know how we got there. Okay, let's see. Okay, so tenders were used, looks like mostly for bike sharing. Many other people also don't know, like myself. Valid answer. For car sharing, 20%, for scooters, 18%. And then interesting, so we haven't used tenders and we have no shared mobility services. Okay, so 14. And then also interesting, we haven't used tenders, but we do have shared mobility services. So maybe in the chat, those 7% tell us how they have attracted the shared mobility services then. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you very much for answering these questions. Do we have a question for Fanny in the chat so far? Simon, has anything popped up?
No questions. No. We have a comment from Darren, but no question.
All right, good. Then I would like to move on to our final speaker. And we will hear now from Parsmo. And this is, I mean, we already talked about the size of the cities. It's a group of small and mid-sized cities that address shared mobility from the angle of the parking policies. It's a young project. Parsmo just started. And so we had a little connection problem before. So I hope, Gelsomina, that we can hear you and you can hear us. And Valentin is sharing your slides. And I hope that the floor is yours and that we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Could you listen to me? Okay, perfect. Thank you again. The webinar is really interesting. I want to bring the greetings not only from Brindisi, but from all our partnership, because we are all gathered in Brindisi with the 30 degree and looking at your webinar. And I cannot think a better beginning for our project with all this insight, really useful for our project.
Well, we're very happy. Hello to the entire Parsmo consortium.
Thank you. So today I will briefly walk you through our initial reflection on how shared mobility interacts with the public space, especially in the context of small and medium-sized cities, like the cities that made our partnership. This insight aims to support a more suitable approach to urban mobility in our territories. Next slide. Actually, shared mobility solutions such as shared cars, e-scooter, and bikes are often designed for large metropolitan areas. And this is our partnership. So we are from all over Europe, and we start the project on the 1st May. So we are really at the beginning. According to the project, we realized that our cities face different realities: less congestion and shorter travel distances, lower population density, which challenges the business model of the mobility providers, as Fanny said before, high car dependencies with limited public transport alternatives. So the challenges of our small and medium-sized cities is to adapt shared mobility models to the scale and specific condition of these smaller urban areas. Next, the other one. A key issue that we face actually is public space clutter, especially from free-floating bikes and e-scooter. These vehicles are often concentrated on sidewalks, creating safety and accessibility problems, particularly for pedestrians and people with disabilities. The lack of designing the parking spaces contributes to a general feeling of disorder, something triggering political resistance to shared mobility. Actually, we need also a change of habits in our culture. So to address this, the project proposed to create designated parking hubs near transit stops, schools, and city centers. Use geofencing and integration with city apps to regulate parking behavior, but also implementing user incentives and penalties, and most importantly, co-design solution with the citizen and local business. Next. Another core element is how parking policy can support shared mobility. If we look at the challenges, today rules tend to favor private cars. Parking actually is often cheap, abundant, and most unrestricted. Shared mobility, instead, lacks clear regulation and dedicated space. So what we suggest is a paradigm shift, transform parking from an obstacle into a tool for sustainability. By this means, creating reserved space and incentives for shared vehicles, strengthening park and ride systems, using digital tools to manage parking dynamically, and working towards regional policy harmonization to avoid fragmented regulation. Next. So another challenge that we face, we deal with, is fragmented and reactive regulation. In many cases, cities only act after a problem arises. To move forward, so we have advocated for including shared mobility in local and regional sustainable urban mobility plans, requiring a minimum service standard from operators, for example, equitable coverage beyond city center, safety guarantees, data sharing. Another one is the updating building regulation to include shared mobility in new developments, as in the previous presentation, and adopting legal instruments that connect shared mobility to wider sustainable goals, such as the reduction of pollution and model shift. So to summarize, next, we think that municipalities should plan ahead rather than reacting to problems that arise, use and think parking policy as a powerful level, integrate mobility planning with urban development, ensure inclusive governance involving all stakeholders, and using it leverage funding and digital tools to make the system work efficiently. Lastly, the last point, we want to address regional authorities who have a fundamental role in supporting municipalities. Actually, they can provide policy guidance on parking and shared mobility. They can align regional plans with the local sustainable plans and funding instruments, but they also can promote cooperation across municipalities, especially when scale is a limitation. They can also facilitate fair tendering frameworks, which is a burden for municipality, and they can monitor results through clear evaluation tools and indicators. And the last slide, I really think that we can use all the insights from this webinar to start our project in the best way. Thank you.
Thank you, Gelsomina. Well, thank you for this overview. I hope the participants were able to understand you. The sound was not excellent. We apologize for that. What was very interesting from your side is to hear the specific difficulties and the challenges of small and mid-sized municipalities. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that slide where you showed that typically the shared mobility solutions are designed with large metropolitan areas in mind, but there are different patterns of demand for mid-sized cities, that there is less density, less users, and a reduced business case for the commercial operators. And also the smaller sized cities suffer more from not as good public transport as the very large cities. So a very car dependent culture. Yeah. And a question for you. Do you, when you are working on the parking policies, do you expect that you will need to remove spaces that are currently used, let's say, by other users for car parking or so? And do you expect there will be conflict for the space use?
Yes, of course. Yes, I think it will be a political matter, but also a really cultural one. Because, you know, in the small center, everyone wants its own car. So to lose some public space for private car will be a struggle, but if we have, you know, we think about the future, it can help city to be more attractive and more livable.
Well, we have seen in the presentation of Fanny, she said that when we regulate micromobility, for instance, with a speed limit, we should not forget about all the other road users as well. So when now bringing this to the topic of parking, maybe you think about parking for shared mobility. Do you think in the cities in your consortium there will be an overhaul of the overall parking policies also for normal cars at the same time? Because it's a good excuse to overhaul the overall parking policy, no?
Yes, of course. We think that we need to improve all the policy parking instruments which are not used to be in an Interreg, in a cooperation project, because it's something that, you know, politicians manage. So it would be nice to see how it will evolve the situation. Today we show that we realize that every city has different kind of mobility problems, but parking policy is quite the same for all.
Yes, and I think I'm very curious to see your work, because it's the first time that a project is focusing solely on parking policies. And well, so I know you're only at the beginning. Let's stay in touch and let's follow your developments. Do we have any questions to Gelsomina?
No, we have no questions of chat.
Okay, wonderful. Then I hope all was clear. And I would like to call all the speakers to turn on their cameras, and let's have a little group discussion to close this webinar. So, first of all, I would like to go back to what Fabian has been saying, that the car sharing journey is a marathon, that it takes a lot of time. But we have seen that the potential of replacing private cars on the street of shared cars is up to 16 cars. Now, this has been for cars. Now, if you think about micromobility, does it have the same beneficial effect of reducing cars on the road? Or I haven't seen any impact assessment. Have you? And if no, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think it connects to the point that I've made with public transportation. If you see bike sharing, e-scooter sharing as part of the public transportation ecosystem, then public transportation in itself becomes a more viable option. And then maybe connected to another point that came up during your word cloud, transportation poverty. So for me, it's a personal story. I grew up in a household where a car has never been a financial option. And I don't know, going half an hour out of the city, somewhere in the forest, then becomes financial viable for some families. And that in itself is, I think, a beneficial point. And the same goes for shared micromobility. So if we think about the public transportation system, it's something that I see 2-3 times a week where I go to my football club, which is around 20 minutes walking distance from the next public transportation stop. And then when we did the bike sharing scheme, I said, I want a bike sharing station there because every day I see people walking there 20 minutes. And it's part of quality of life that these people can now just take the bike with no extra cost, save at least 50 minutes of their lifetime every week just using a bike. And that in itself is a great option. So you don't always need to replace a car to make shared mobility a very viable option. So I think shared mobility, especially micromobility, helps in terms of transportation poverty as well. So yeah.
And this is a very good point. Yeah. But how about this removing cars from the street? Because many people say micromobility removes users from public transport. Now,
Well,
if you, of course, say that shared mobility, micromobility is part of public transport, then you do not have this conflict.
Yeah, and that's always the argument that I would bring forward. It helps to densen the public transportation network, have bike sharing as a last mile solution, and then we're not talking about rivals, we're talking about allies. And then, yeah, I think in Germany we have a wonderful word for it. It's called the Umweltverbund, the climate alliance, if it makes sense in English.
Okay. Fanny, do you have any take on that?
Yes, sure. So it's true that something that has been mentioned a lot, especially at the beginning of e-scooters, was like usually those were people that used to take public transportation or walk. But I mean, we also need to be honest when we're looking at these assessments, like just because you ride a car doesn't mean you're not cycling, doesn't mean you're not walking. Like in general, there's a lot of mixed use. Of course, it would be a great opportunity for the first and last mile. And I think this is something we should work towards. But in general, it also brings more diversity and also a certain freedom of choice. So I think it's really important also to diversify the ecosystem and to have a lot of different options in the end, also to perhaps actually straight away from the car.
Yes, fair enough. Gelsomina, any ideas on this point? You don't need to. Okay,
I'm
we see.
asking if someone from the partnership can say something.
All right.
Yes, hi, this is Bram from Way2Go, advisory partner with it.
Hi, Bram.
I must say that hi, nice to meet you again. I must say that I'm exactly we are on the same page as what Fabian was saying. I think micromobility, it's an ally of public transport, and yeah, I don't want to give any publicity, but tomorrow we actually have a publish study together with Antwerp University with 8 operators, which actually really shows that public transport and micromobility is collaborating well, and they are good allies, I think.
Thank you. Okay, so rather an ally. And of course, it's especially interesting in the perspective that Fabian mentioned, if a city is thinking of subsidizing stations in the outskirts where are less users and that are less commercially interesting. No. Okay. The other question that I would like to address with you is the question of the sizes of the city. We see obviously that there's a correlation between the size of a municipality and the presence of shared mobility services. I think it's no surprise that commercial providers go where many potential users are. So it's in the metro areas, in the larger cities. And we have heard from very thinly populated areas, municipalities well, in thinly rural areas, that they have not even been able to attract a single commercial car sharing provider or an e-bike sharing provider. So what could they do in this case? What's your message for the small territories that don't have a commercial business case for shared mobility? Do they have to make a cross on shared mobility, or how could they go about? Any ideas?
Well, maybe as a first step, you can take the commercial out of it, and that's something connected to what I said, grassroots initiatives, neighborhood initiatives, because that's something we sometimes lack in urban areas and cities, is the feeling of community. And if you have this in a rural area, in a village, be the mediator between those parties. Get a framework going that allows neighborhoods, communities to share a car. Think about hosting digital services that enables this sharing, that lowers the threshold for sharing options. That would be a message. Or maybe, again, if you're public administration, be the first customer to a car sharing provider.
Those are quite good ideas, to take the commercial out of it, or support maybe user-to-user sharing, or to support the sharing of private cars. Yeah. Fanny, do you have any experiences at POLIS with small cities? I know your members are rather big, but certainly you must encounter also the other extreme.
So, indeed, I mean, we have the network of cities and regions also have a lot of small and medium-sized cities. This is actually something we work a lot on at the moment. So we don't have any ready responsive, but there's, for example, I mean, again, a big city, Paris, but I mean, around you have the La Métropole, and also there it doesn't make much sense, for example, to have a bus line or things like that. So they're working currently with carpooling. In the Netherlands, we had a presentation yesterday from the Netherlands where they're also trying to implement a lot, but this is actually still an issue. This is something we have to work on. And I think you were right to ask these questions. I don't have one size fits it all answer for you, to be fair. Voilà.
Bram, I'm sure you have some ideas.
Yes, a lot of, again, I agree with Fabian. So peer-to-peer initiatives is something that definitely can work. And another concept that has proven to be successful is a minimal revenue guarantee for operators. So it's basically allocating a little bit of budget for making them go break even at least. And we see that in rural areas, small cities, this really helps to get an commercial offer of shared mobility there, and to let it grow in the first years. So minimal revenue guarantee is definitely something to look at.
I believe in Flanders, there are also municipalities that have decided to share their own fleet in off hours over the weekend and at night. Bram, do you know anything about that?
Yes, also that indeed there are some municipal fleets, for example, that are shared outside office hours, which is a first step of providing an offering of shared mobility, mostly car sharing in this case, in a small municipality, or yeah, that's for sure something to look into as well.
I think these are interesting avenues to explore. So municipalities are not totally powerless, even if the concentration of users is missing. All right. So where are you going on study visit at the Parsmo now?
I will give the floor back to Gelsomina for that.
Okay, we will test the service is Sanvito on demand. It's a service Sanvito on demand. Sometimes the name is SWORD. It's a service on demand, so people in the municipality, in the smaller municipality around Brindisi, can ask for a van, minivan, that can take them, can bring them to the hospital, to the city center. So it's
It's an on-demand service. Yeah, sorry, the audio is very bad. So I summarize. It's an on-demand service that you're going to visit, and I think I understood it's taking people to medical appointments with shared mobility. Is it?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah, good. So then I would say we are coming to the end of our group discussion, and we would like to wrap up. However, let me read Darren's comment from the chat to you. Darren says most micromobility trips are not replacing an individual car trip, but the existence of the option of shared mobility prevents people from becoming a car owner and driving everywhere. So again, this is a long-term perspective. If you imagine that you have a very good infrastructure of shared mobility, the next generation of young people will probably say, well, I mean, this is sufficient and it's much cheaper than owning a car. Anyway, especially if the parking policies for cars are so restrictive that you say it is uncomfortable to own a car. So I'm very happy that we have associated finally the topic of parking policies with the topic of sustainable mobility. I've been waiting for that for a long time. So thanks for bringing that on the table. And I would like to conclude by asking each of the speakers what he or she has found most interesting and what's your main takeaway from the webinar, please.
Okay, I could start because it's usually always Fabian who has to go first.
Good.
I think the most important thing, so we saw something from a city, then a report from like multiple cities and region, and something that is actually just starting and in the process. So I think what we're doing here is the most important part. And I think this discussing these things, sharing, and also being able to discuss these things, because in the end, we don't want to reinvent the wheel each time, but perhaps being able to learn from what has worked at some place and being able to implement this somewhere else. So this was really great and really interesting. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Fanny.
Yeah, same here. I think it was very interesting, especially looking forward to the project results of POSMO, because that's always something in the back of my mind as well. Do we really need public parking spaces for shared micromobility everywhere? Are we only concentrating them? And then the general questions, are we blowing this problem out of proportion? So maybe a little thought experiment for all of you. If you're walking home today, how many cars do you see blocking the pedestrian way, and how many e-scooters do you see?
A good one for Gelsomina, who has turned off the camera. Gelsomina, any takeaways from today? What did you find most interesting?
Yes, as I said, for us, okay, too much. I tried to connect by the mobile. Okay. And for us, everything was really nice because there is a big synergy with our projects and our what we are going to try to test in our cities. So listening to Fanny and to Fabian for us was gave the really insight for our future work. Thank you very much.
Great. Don't hesitate to discover the resources that my colleague Simon showed that the policy learning platform already have. We have recordings from past webinars and we have a policy brief. And I would like to give our audience the possibility to tell us what they found most interesting. And you can turn to the chat for a last time and click on the link and tell us a little bit what you found most interesting and what is your main takeaway. Don't regulate shared mobility without regulating the rest. The tender tips, concrete examples. And how the cities deal with the actual challenges. And the good regulation, the good tender takes time. The multiple examples and plans presented. The whole webinar was interesting. Well, good. Transportation poverty is a leading issue and can be addressed through shared mobility. And then, okay, Parsmo and Bremen and examples and the concrete examples. Good. Well, I hope that gives a glimpse of what you liked about this webinar. I would like to thank very much our speakers for having taken the time to be here with us and to share. And well, good luck to each of you in your respective projects and associations and undertakings. Parsmo, especially good luck and greetings to everybody. And welcome to the Interreg Europe Policy Platform and the Interreg Europe project family. And yeah, then thanks to my colleagues for having helped pull this off, and to all of you for having stayed until the end. I wish everybody a good afternoon, and I hope to see you soon again in another one of our mobility webinars. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, bye.